White opens the game with the move pawn to e4. I respond pawn to c5, signaling the Sicilian defense. Knight to f3 development. Pawn to d6, pawn to d4, pawn captures pawn, knight captures pawn, and what we have is an open Sicilian where the c pawn and d pawn are exchanged off the board. Knight to f6 development and attacking the e4 pawn. Knight to c3 development and defending e4. Pawn to e6 signaling the Scheveningen variation of the Sicilian defense and making way for my bishop to come to e7. Bishop to e2 development and making way to castle kingside. Pawn to a6 guarding b5 from the white minor pieces. Both knights and bishops can make use of that square. Also, it supports a pawn to b5 move at some point. When once that pawn is there, it can push forward again to b4 and be attacking the knight, and the knight will then have to move. Also, the bishop can then make use of the b7 square, and the queen could come to c7 where she doesn't have to worry about a knight maybe coming to the b5 square, and from that square it would be attacking the queen. And so there's a lot of meaning already behind just this very small pawn move, pawn to a6. Bishop to e3, developing the last of the minor pieces for white. Now we see pawn to b5, making way for the bishop to come to b7. Pawn to a3, preventing pawn to b4, where I would be kicking the knight off of the c3 square. Bishop to b7, adding pressure to the e4 pawn for what is now a second time. It's only defended once, so white has to do something about it. We see bishop to d3, defending the pawn for a second time. Knight on b to d7, connecting my knights, allowing my rook to come to c8, or it would function very well along this half-open c-file. And from d7, it has ideas of coming to e5, c5, or b6 at some point. And now we see knight to b3. So I believe this move is made so that if my knight comes here, you can take the knight. That way you wouldn't have to be reacting to the knight's pressure against e4. Bishop to e7, just development and making way to castle. Pawn to g4, and I believe this is an inaccuracy. This move, the intention that this move has is to come to g5 to attack the knight, and the knight would have to be chased away to an unfavorable square. For example, if I were to castle kingside, that's no good here because pawn push, and my knight unfortunately has to go to e8, and that's just an ugly position to have to go to. And so it's important to take that into account and play the move pawn to d5, often a very freeing move in the Sicilian opening. If you could make this pawn move, if you could get this move in successfully, and get rid of white's only central pawn, then that often benefits black. And so I play pawn to d5 here. I'm attacking e4 3 times now with my knight and pawn directly and my bishop indirectly. White responds with pawn captures pawn, knight captures pawn, knight captures knight, bishop captures knight. I'm attacking the rook, rook to g1, and now we see queen to c2. I don't castle just yet. Instead I have thoughts of maybe grabbing that h2 pawn since it's unprotected, or at least forcing white to maybe react to that threat. White chooses not to react to that threat at all and plays queen to d2. I could grab this pawn in this position, but I choose not to for the following reasons. I didn't want to have to worry about my king's safety. If I were to grab this pawn, white can castle queenside, and if I castle kingside, at some point I might have to worry about this rook getting to h1. Right now it's no good because the bishop's guarding there, but at some point I might have to worry about my king. And so I don't want to have to worry about my king, and instead I ignore this pawn, instead just focus on the weak points in white's position. Play knight to e5, focusing on f3. If the knight's allowed to get there, it would be forking the queen, king, and rook. And so we see bishop to e2 defending that square. Rook on a to d8. I have thoughts of capturing the knight, followed by grabbing the queen. Queen to c3, offering a queen exchange at the cost of ruining the pawn structure. This move is made seeing how the white king is probably less comfortable than the black king, or excuse me, not as safe. White is trying to just get rid of one of the most dangerous attacking pieces, the queen. So that's what queen to c3 does. I go ahead with the queen exchange, and what I get in return is weaknesses in the white position. These pawns I have highlighted are now going to be my focal point. I'm going to add pressure to these pawns, and unfortunately for white, whenever I attack these pawns, he's going to have to devote either his bishops, rooks, or knight to having to defend them. I just complete my development in castle, getting this rook in play. Pawn to f4, putting a question to my knight. Knight to f3, forking the king and rook. Capturing is forced, otherwise you lose material. King to f2, attacking the bishop. Bishop to e4, adding pressure to the white position, unprotected pawn. Knight to d4 defends the pawn. Rook to c8, adding pressure to the c3 pawn, which is unprotected. And at this point, white plays pawn to a4, just trying to get some activity for his rooks to open up these files. The end result is that white ends up losing a pawn. I just grab here and then eventually here in the game. But maybe a better defense would be bishop here, guarding this pawn. Although it looks passive, I think it's important to maybe do a move such as this. But instead we see pawn to a4. I capture the pawn. Pawn captures pawn, pawn captures pawn, and now knight captures pawn, attacking my rook. I could capture this pawn right away and give check, but in chess, if you see a good move, try and find a better one. And so I choose to play first bishop to h4, checking this king. And what this does is force the king closer to the center of the board, where I feel that my rooks and bishops will be able to give him a better headache. And so after king to e2, now I capture the pawn, and he has to interpose with the bishop, otherwise I grab the h2 pawn. Well, that would at least be one variation I could look forward to doing. And so since this bishop is now pinned, I attack it, often a very good strategy in chess. If you have one of your opponent's pieces pinned, it's a good idea to attack it. We see king to e3. If I grab the bishop, he grabs my bishop. Instead, I just choose to support my bishop, and then this is still a threat against him. Pawn captures pawn, and now I have the threat of not only capturing the bishop, but coming to d3. If the bishop moves, it runs into checkmate. Any bishop move would result in checkmate, rook to d3. And so we see rook on a to d1, and this is just a matter of winning the game at this point. White is basically in a knot, and I'm just trying to make the knot tighter. So rook to d3 checks the king. The king goes to e2, and this bishop is back in a pin. And at this point, I wanted to come to h3 to attack the pawn and get ready to come move my bishop to f3, where I would check the king and grab the rook. But I didn't want this knight to come to the d4 square and attack my rook. So first I play rook to b2, attack the knight and chase him away to an unfavorable square, c7. And note that if it comes here, I could just take it. Since this bishop is pinned to the king, bishop captures rook is impossible. So the knight goes to c7, and only now do I come to h3, getting ready to come here with my bishop, and more directly just grab the pawn. King to f1, getting out of that threat, and now I see a forced variation where I'm going to end up winning a piece. More specifically, I could win this bishop by force, and it happens in the following way. Rook to f3 check, king to e2, rook to f2 check, king to e3, rook to b3 check, king to d4, rook to d3 check, king to e5, and this is as far as I calculated. I saw that I could grab this bishop, but once this position was presented to me on the board, I felt that king to f7 was best, where I guard e6, and I'm getting ready to checkmate with bishop to f6. And just out of momentum, white just goes ahead and makes the move rook captures pawn. White could basically resign at this point, but just out of momentum, these moves were played out. King captures rook, rook check, king to f7, bishop to b4, and now we see bishop to f6, which is checkmating the white king in the center of the board. So that's all for this game. I hope we got something out of it. Take care. Bye.